Okay, I'd like to call to order our meeting of SEAC meeting of Thursday, May 25th, 2023. I'll begin with the land acknowledgement. The Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school board and schools are located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge that the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas of the Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. It's on these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, learn, and live. I'd like to move on then to the Durham District School Board's Indigenous rights and human rights. The Durham District School Board recognizes Indigenous rights are distinct. In the exercise of those rights, Indigenous staff and students shall not be subjected to actions with the aim or effect of depriving them of these distinct rights. The Durham District School Board is committed to learning and working environments that center human rights and equity and are safe, welcoming, respectful, equitable, accessible, inclusive, and free from discrimination. We're going to move on to our regrets. We have received regrets today from Trustee Oldfield, Trustee Miller, and Hannah Nguyen. It's with respect to Hannah Nguyen. Do you have a name? Mm-hmm. Okay, with respect to Hannah, she is the SEAC rep until the end of the school year. She's sitting for Easter seals, but for a variety of personal reasons, she's not been able to attend. This would be the fourth meeting in a row. Now, under section 7 of the SEAC regulation, the board or the committee can pass a resolution authorizing her to remain as a member of SEAC until the end of the school year anyway. Because the way the regulations is set out is if you miss more than 3 consecutive meetings, you would lose your spot unless the committee passes a resolution. Given that Hannah is only going to be here to the end of the year, I think it's really important that we pass a resolution so that Hannah can leave on her terms and have the opportunity to say goodbye, and I'm for us to be able to also say goodbye to Hannah. So I'm hoping somebody will put forward a resolution. Sarah?
What you said.
Did you get the resolution that we have? Because it has to be within the minutes.
Yeah.
It has to be in the minutes.
Okay, hang on. One moment, please, while I have the actual words here. There. All right. SEAC resolves to allow Easter Seals Ontario to continue as a member of this committee until the end of the 22-23 school year, despite its SEAC representative missing 4 consecutive meetings due to personal reasons. That's the motion I'm putting forward.
Anybody want to second? Says or no, all in favor? It's unanimous. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, then we will move on then to roll call.
Hi, Kathy Keating, voice for deaf and hard hearing children in Durham region.
Anthony Phelan, representative for Durham Secondary Administrators.
Tor Kelly, Durham Down Syndrome Association.
Elizabeth Daniel, member at large.
Rowan Jarvis, Durham Disability Association, Durham Region.
Spencer Renee Burrell, Autism Ontario.
Morgan Cameron, member at large. Prima Sacker, vice principal at Southwood Park, Chess.
Connor Jenkinson, board assistant leads with Inclusive Student Services.
Lisa Rye, recording secretary.
Andrea McCauley, superintendent of Inclusive Student Services.
Eva Kyriakides, Association for Bright Children and SEAC chair. Okay, can we get a motion, if everybody is good with the agenda as it stands, can we get a motion to approve the agenda? Rowan, any seconds?
And we have Lisa Drake online.
Oh, my apologies, we have Lisa Drake online as well. Hello. Okay, can we get a seconder for the agenda? Kathy, all in favor? Okay, motion approved. Okay, the approval of the minutes from the April 20th, 2023 meeting. Does anybody have any questions or concerns with respect to those minutes? No? Can we get a motion then to approve minutes? Kara, seconders? Rowan, all in favor? Okay, motion passed.
Just a question around the minutes. So trustee Miller and trustee Oldfield have been super consistent and wonderful about bringing life to the minutes when they're put into the board meeting. And so the invitation from them both is, as you pass the minutes, if there's one or two items of particular notability to the committee that you would like to be their highlights in the boardroom space, that we can share that through to them. So wondered if, as we get in that adjust kind of the agenda and habit to say when we're approving the minutes, if there was one or two items of particular common interest around the table that we would highlight and then be able to provide that for their consideration, they invited that.
Oh, okay.
Really wanting to represent the work of SEAC.
That's fantastic, good to hear. If anybody wants to put anything forward, feel free to pop an email to myself and Lisa, and we'll forward it on to the trustees so that they can do that for these minutes if you like. Okay? Okay, then moving on to item 7, the staff reports, beginning with the administration report.
Thanks. So tonight, the administration report focuses on the important role that SEAC has in consultation with the district and in connection with families in the community. So the first is just to bring you a quick update on the Inclusive Student Services Special Education Plan for next year. So really appreciate the feedback of SEAC, not only on the SEAC standard, but other changes reflected in the document. The plan will be before the trustees as an information item on June 5th, and then going before the board for approval at the board meeting on June 19th. Our motion from board is a requirement of our submission to the ministry. So we will circulate that draft as well, but just bringing 3 highlights. There is specific woven thread to the district's commitment to the outcomes of the Ontario Human Rights Commission right to read inquiry. And so we've embedded some statements around commitment to work during the next school year around that. We have moved the mental health and wellbeing action plan into the special education plan now that it sits as an overall inclusive student services plan. So that mental health and wellbeing action plan that is 3 years, next year is year 2, right within the document. And then draft changes that did go part of the draft budget to trustees presented last week at Education Finance. So previous to that, senior team had opportunity led by Associate Director Wright to bring the revenue to trustees last week. Senior team again led by Associate Director Wright and the business department. We brought draft expenditures. And so for the purpose of SEAC and reflected in the special education plan is an increase of 1 member to the psychological services team, 1 member to social work team, and 3 members to speech language services in alignment with the work that Lisa is leading with curriculum in terms of right to read. So at a time that, yes, we are at growth enrollment as a district, which helps buffer in terms of budget, there were also significant changes in terms of revenue coming into the district. So we will look back to it when we go to talk about the deputation to education finance, but in a budget that was set to be net neutral, to gain 5 positions direct service to students is a very significant commitment of the district, reflected through to the Board of Trustees. So that's part of the special education plan. Just confirming to members of the committee around the SEAC parent guardian survey. So it opens live on Tuesday morning coming up, May 30th, and will run through to June 15th. We have set a 2-tier communication with families. So last evening, all family members, guardians of students with current IEPs and or IPRCs completed for next year, got a little memo through Messenger saying, hey, SEAC is conducting a survey for the purpose of learning more about communication with our teams, and that families should look for that live link to be directly sent to them on Tuesday morning, and that will be a second information push direct through school messenger. We have provided a memo to the entire Board of Trustees, as well as put it in our operations memo out to administrators and the e-bulletin to certs, just so that there's awareness of the system. And we look forward to bringing some initial information, was the commitment of our Assessment and Accountability Office during our June meeting, which will time out. Really interesting, given the next and final update for you this evening. So the Board of Trustees is responsible for the strategic plan of the district, and then the senior team, along with all team members, are responsible for the operational plan that sits beside that. So the current strategic plan was extended until December 31st. And we are currently in process of developing the next strategic plan for the district. So the team is in consultation phase right now. And the plan is through to development and sharing with community by the end of the 2023 school year. SEAC is a really important group to have consultation into what that plan looks like, sounds like. So we appreciated your comments around how we gather feedback and who we gather feedback from. A significant part of the June SEAC meeting has been set aside in draft for Josh Fullen and his colleague Katie from Maximum City, which is the firm that the board is consulting with, are going to come here and do a 45-minute input session with SEAC next month to get your input right on the early stages of the development of that plan. And they're going to be here if requesting an adjustment to the agenda. We'll start with them. And so really important, if you don't mind being here, they'll walk you through process and gather input. They do a really nice job of it being conversational. And again, just really thanking SEAC for ongoing consultation to the district. And then I'll just close with a reminder that the Abilities Track and Field Meet is coming up in a couple weeks in June. And so you're more than welcome to attend for part of full day. If you can just let Lisa know so that we can tag and have people meet and greet you, that would be great. And that's it in reports.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for Andrew with respect to the administrative role?
Just one question, actually, two parts. You had said there were 5 new roles.
Correct.
3 were speech and language.
Correct.
1 was psych. What was the last one?
Social work.
Social work. And how do those relate to the right to read? You mentioned it, right?
So I think, Lisa, are you speaking to it a little bit, or? She can, okay, your volume's up. So how we're leading implementation of strategies from the right to read is actually Lisa is working directly with Connor's Role Comparative in curriculum. And then there's a bunch of us that sit second tier to that. And so we really feel as a district, in order to move the recommendations from right to read, based on it being around language acquisition, that the partnership between teachers and speech pathologists are the magical combination in order to support classroom educators. And so part of that work has been done within Lisa's team, but Lisa, I don't know if you want to speak to it now or in the department report. Up to you.
Are you asking me? Sorry.
If you want to, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing a little bit of trying to manage the child getting snack at the same time the questions were being asked. He always chooses the wrong time. I'm sorry, can you repeat your question just to make sure that I'm on the right track?
Rowan was just asking around in reference to us, the 3 positions that have been announced at this point, augmentative to your team and the work that the speech language pathologists are doing in connection to right to read outcomes.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think the other piece too is that the speech and language team hasn't had a significant increase in a number of years. And so when we think about the work that we're doing with the teachers and the educators around literacy, which has been an important and central part for the focus of the team this year, there are so many other things that the team's doing too, that they were really starting to feel the pressure of the growth enrollment and all of the asks coming their way. So to Andrea's point around to literacy, and then additionally all the other asks they're getting, the increase is going to be significantly impactful for the team's ability to support students.
Thank you.
You said 2 more?
No, the first part was
Oh,
just
sorry.
establishing the 5 rules.
I'm sorry, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, as our trustees both were unable to make it today, actually, and the alternate, we're all unable to make it today, there won't be a board report today, so hopefully they'll update us next meeting on both board meetings at that point.
May I just share as well that, when board met, it was our March minutes from SEAC that came forward, which was the meeting that SEAC passed the motion around the requested statement in, support of the 2S LGBTQIA community. And so trustee Oldfield, in presenting the March minutes, reread that message into the space, during the board meeting as well. Just solidifying the commitment as well as the, community concern, for well-being and mental health of those in our community. And so just wanted to share with SEAC that that was re-articulated into that space, as I said, sharing from SEAC.
Excellent, that's good to hear, yeah, words reiterated. Okay, so we will move on then to our Inclusive Student Services Department report. Lisa, take
So happy to share the mic with Lisa. So I know my section, usually we have a little more to share, but we're also trying to be very cognizant of the time that we're doing as well, because I know that with the last time, which would be March, that I was here, we definitely, Andrew and I looked at the watch afterwards, and well, we took a lot of space, and that we don't necessarily want to do that, because there's lots of great momentum that is built within this room through conversation, through questions, through all that. That's really the role we're doing. So want to highlight that the first week, often referred to around Education Week, but it's also noted as Children's Mental Health Week. And it's really about those 3 points that are on the screen. And when we think about it, decreasing stigma is a major thing that we have to be able to think about. And coming from the cypher today, which was our Black Male Empowerment Conference that was held across the district, where there were, I want to say very easily, 200 to 250 grade 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 Black males who were there in space and enjoying a great day of fantastic workshops and fantastic space. Part of that was also around children's mental health and about how there can be stigma, and again, talking about how this becomes a space and how this can be something as well. So that's something that was neat to be able to see as a continued message throughout the system as well. And when we saw some of the social media that came out around that as well, and the various talk points for each day, such as Mindful Monday or Talk About It Tuesday, I know they had a little catch tags to it, but they actually did have impact within schools. Schools were talking about it, schools were actually, they were things that were being brought back. I know I definitely had a couple of reach outs saying, hey, this actually was actually pretty impactful. I think 2 schools in Oshawa where it said, hey, can you please pass this on to Stephanie? But I definitely want you to hear about this as well around a couple of spaces. And it was really about the fact that the activities were really, they meant something to the children, they meant something to youth who were engaging with them, and to students as well. As well as there were a series of, I said, short videos that were produced as well, but it was really one of those activities and making a focus within the classroom that definitely landed for a lot of our students. And I have to put that back onto the mental health team, who also does that fantastic work across the system, is continuing to bring out this work as well as led by Stephanie Palmer as well. So I will hand the mic over to my wonderful colleague, Lisa Drake.
Thanks, Connor. So this is Speech, Language, and Hearing Month, and it's interesting hearing Connor talk about timing of the meeting and just time of the year. There are so many times when we get to this part of the year and where everybody's so busy. I really wish Speech, Language, and Hearing Month was like January or November, albeit much gloomier. It's definitely at a kind of a tricky part of the year for us from a school perspective. However, we are always excited to celebrate the month, and it's been interesting the last couple of years trying to figure out how we bring awareness to communication and when we've had COVID the last couple of years. So prior to COVID, there used to be a lot of really cool games and exciting things that the teams would do in the atrium at the Ed Center. But now that more virtual work is pretty common, and but we are back in schools, we wanted to sort of hit schools out in the world, and not just at the Ed Center, to really try and work on promoting speech, language, and hearing at the school level, not just centrally and not just through social media, but really trying to capture some of the work and how the work that we do and some of the things that we do impact kids. So what the team did, the big thing that they did this year was we had members from all of our teams come together, including the ASL interpreters. And it's always wonderful to get the opinions. The speech language pathologists are quite a large in number, and our smaller teams that represent hearing are really important. And so it's nice to get a variety of different topics. And so what we created for the system was a quiz that really looks at not like how many did you get right and is it a skill testing question, but questions that sort of prompt people to do a deeper think around what the impact of oral language literacy, peer interaction, academics, behavior, etc. are. So one of the questions, for example, was thinking about how often kids who are expressing themselves through what we would call behaviors, what percentage of kids might actually also have language challenges as well, and communication is impacting their ability to share their ideas, and that's coming out in ways that aren't seen so positively in the system. So we really wanted to make sure that the content reflected the kids. We also focused, like I mentioned, on hearing, how important it is and what the impact is when kids are hard of hearing, especially younger, what that impact is on language development, on further communication, and also really centering ASL, even though it may not be, the whole system may not have as much exposure to students who are communicating through ASL, but it was a really important opportunity for us to promote what a wonderful language it is, and how it really does it does capture all the elements of a spoken language in its own unique and wonderful way. So that is what we've done to promote this month. Any questions before I move on?
I have a question for you, Lisa.
Sure.
Are there communication disorders assistants employed at the DDSB?
No, not at this time. We have done a little scan. We're sort of keeping an eye out at other school boards, and there does seem to be a mix of boards that employ communicative disorders assistants, and also how they're utilized to support kids in schools. So Andrea and I talk about it a couple of times a year, and are always have an eye to that possibility as we're looking at service.
I think the quiz was an interesting idea to try to create sort of a dialogue in an untraditional way, I guess, about some of the issues with speech, language, and hearing. I think that there would be maybe some moments to reflect on how, when we do acknowledge that ASL is a distinctive language, and so I appreciate the question about how like facial expressions are super important in signing, for example, but then there's also a question that talks about how you have to hear language to be able to read. And that's actually contradictory to the entire message about ASL being a distinctive language.
Yeah.
Because children who are CODA, who have a rich exposure to language entirely ASL, are fine because they're getting the language. It's when children aren't getting access to language. So it could be signed just like it could be second, like it doesn't have to be English, it has to be a language. And so I appreciate that from a speech language perspective, that oral language is foundational is an inherent premise. I also think at the end, when we say top tier SLP, we probably shouldn't use the acronym, like we should say probably talk to your speech language pathologist or hearing resource teacher, like find those entry points for people in that conversation, or ASL interpreter even, because we're all coming at that quiz from a different perspective. And some of the messaging that might be implied might not always be what the intended outcomes would be.
Yeah, fair enough. And thanks for sharing that. I find that, as you know, we're always wanting to be inclusive, there's always the language that we fall back on that is instinctive and needs to be challenged. One thing that I try to keep at the forefront is when I'm, you know, talking about having a conversation, or I want to hear from you, changing it to I want to share I want to get your input or your feedback, but it's sometimes we miss it, and I appreciate when you're bringing that forward. So thank you very much for pointing that out.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, like it says, they must hear 1 million versus 40 million, like it's meant to be about listening.
Yeah.
And I appreciate it's receptive and language, right? Like they need to receive language.
Yeah.
How that language is received might depend on the family. And so I think that, I know we often forget our CODA students as well, but also just a student who's in a deaf family. And so I appreciate we're moving, but that there's some contradictions at times, that get trickier.
You know, and I really appreciate that. It's so interesting because that question in particular was written by our audiologist, who has the lens of constantly being immersed in hearing. But you're absolutely right. We need to do a scan for that to make sure that it's consistent and reflective.
Well, and from a personal perspective, there's a question that talks about, as someone who has a deaf and hard of hearing child, it says, who can you talk to about your deaf and hard of hearing students? And we haven't had an audiologist or a speech language pathologist work with my child in years. So they would not be able to speak to my child, without, like, and they might be able to if they were seeing her file or whatever, but it's interesting how it looks different in different circumstances and has the models and depending on how that child is being IPRC'd as well, I imagine, right? Who's on that team and so forth.
No, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And I'm always open to that feedback. Please feel free to reach out if you're ever seeing things that are standing out for you like that. I very much welcome the input. So thank you for raising it.
And if you want input from families prior to, or you need for those voices, we'd be happy, like I'd rather do it sooner than after, but that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Oh, okay. Go ahead, Lisa. I think you have another slide, right?
Yep, absolutely. Connor's going to advance it for me, I think, right? Oh yeah. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to share this year was just this year around what we've been focusing on across the teams generally. This is definitely not an inclusive list. It's just some of the things that have really stood out to us in terms of what our priorities have been and what we've really been doing. So the speech language pathologists this year, given the right to read inquiry that came out last year, supporting structured literacy within classrooms has been a huge focus. And the team feels very strongly about helping to ensure rich classroom teaching practices. So a lot of the body of research that is what the inquiry is founded on are there elements that have been a core part of our profession for quite some time. So we have some background in terms of understanding what the literature is saying. And like Andrew was mentioning, partnering with teachers has been really helpful. They've been working a lot with their literacy coaches in the schools and going into the classroom where they're welcomed, where the teachers are really receptive to that learning. And the teachers are, and in those spaces where the teachers have welcomed them in, we've had a lot of really wonderful feedback. Like, I didn't have readers before, but now the kids in my room can read and they're starting to write. So it's been really exciting to see that even though we don't yet have a new curriculum around language and literacy, we're hoping that's coming soon so we can plan. But while we don't have that today, we are sort of doing it in a grassroots way in the places where they're in spaces where we're being asked to come in. So that's been really fun and very rewarding. The hearing resource teachers, they have a ton of things that they do. But also in line with the right to read inquiry, we have put some funding into supporting the education or in Gillingham-based training of the speech language pathologists and the hearing resource teachers as well as some other groups within the board to help promote that teaching practice. And what was really exciting about having the hearing resource team do this as well is we got their perspective around when we think about sounds and when we're asking kids to listen to sounds and to decode letters into sounds and encode them in the other direction, not all kids have the same access. And so the HRTs have taken the principles, the foundational principles of what we're asking for and what we know to be important for teaching kids to read. And we've had some really interesting ways that things have been modified in order to take phonics and make it visual. And some of the anecdotal feedback that I've been given is that for some of the kids, like, who've been on a hearing resource teacher's caseload for years and now are in grade 8 and have struggled with literacy, applying the principles that they have learned has really helped kids to gain a ton of confidence and a ton more success and starting to close gaps that we weren't seeing in the past. So that has been one of the most exciting aspects of when I think about shifts in literacy. That's been one of the most exciting that I've seen this year. I'm going to flip out of literacy though. Does anyone have before I do that, does anyone have questions about literacy?
No.
Okay. Okay. Something else that also happened to happen in May, which is kind of neat, is that the teachers, the hearing resource teachers, wanted to bring back what used to be known as Kids Like Me and Teens Like Me Day. And instead of calling it that, we've sort of, I think, moved away from that title in the interest of trying to get kids together across the district who do have an identification of DHH. They can come to meet each other and feel connected to a community that they may not realize exists in different buildings across the board. The elementary students went to the Metro Toronto Zoo, and secondary students went to the McLaughlin Art Gallery. And the reports from the teachers were really positive. And I have a cool video to show you on the next slide that we got parent permission to share with you. It's pretty good. The ASL interpreters continue to advocate for the kids. They're a fantastic team. We have some phenomenally skilled and passionate interpreters in our board, and they are always trying to help elevate the support for the kids who are using ASL in the system, and beyond, like ensuring that all our videos are closed captioned and making sure that participation is equal as the rest of the kids in the school, and they go above and beyond every day. The one thing that they really did take initiative with recently was planning and starting to create, with some support, a field trip to Sir James Whitney which is the provincial school for the deaf, because they're putting on a production of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory in ASL, which will be interpreted, and that's taking place on June 7th. So we're taking a small group of kids are going, those who are using ASL as their first language in school. We're all going to go to see Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and really get to connect with some other kids from the community as well.
Fantastic.
Okay, Connor, are you able to play the video?
You'll have to bear with me. I was on.
Okay, so I'll explain sort of the context to the video. Michelle Mallard is one of our hearing resource teachers, and the two students that are in the video, both are students that she works with, but are from different schools. And my understanding is that these kids had not yet met each other before this day, but really clicked, like had an immediate connection with each other. And she gave them the iPad to take some pictures, and they ended up making this video all on their own. And it's a really lovely example of what happens when we have the opportunity to bring kids together.
There. Sorry, I grabbed the wrong PowerPoint.
That's okay.
It's too big a video to send it in there. Ready?
Watch me fill the time. It was an amazing event in McLaughlin. I had to take the day off to make it work, and I have the privilege of doing that, and I know that there's still conversations about how we make it more accessible to families, but so worth it, and my child got sick and had to leave early, and it's still so worth it. And it's grade 7 to 12, so she walked in grade 7, didn't know anybody and had a ball, and they came out with like merch, so they were pretty excited and lots of art created, and yeah, really, really positive. Yeah.
The feedback from the gallery too is that they were so impressed by the kids and the art that they created. They were just so impressed by the group. I have it up if you want me to share it.
If you could,
Yeah, I'm ready to go.
okay.
Let's try.
Okay. Let's hope the sound works. Oh.
That is very true, and it's very disrespectful to call us deaf. Yeah, we're hard of hearing, not deaf. Like most of the kids here. Yes. So we're best friends in the hearing loss, and we're on a field trip up to Toronto Zoo. For kids with hard of hearing. So yeah, and this is our little walkie-talkies. They're actually called an FM system. And mine is connected to her ears. Hers is connected to my ears. So we can talk to each other. Like a walkie-talkie, but it's not true. Yeah, it's not. Like if these break, they're like $1,000. It's true. Just like your earrings are $1 million. Yeah, and this is way more. Just 2 hearing aids, I am a hearing aid in my ear, aka cochlear implants. So yeah, that's it from Addie and Amelia.
Did you all hear that okay?
Yeah, it came out.
Yeah.
Aren't they the greatest advocates? I love that video, just them being so excited to share their technology and their friendship. It was so lovely.
They're able to places other than they were explaining how it worked. Okay. Their own little walkie-talkies. It's great. Do we have any questions with respect to the report? Comments? Go ahead, Ron.
This is just more of a comment based upon the video. I think we have subjects in this forum and outside of these 4 walls, and we discuss them, and oftentimes just because we can't necessarily affect someone one-on-one, can't be in everyone's room at the same time, we talk at this 60,000 foot view, and I love to see that, because that is, if you guys have heard me over the years, it's grassroots. It's truly, like, I didn't understand how it worked until they explained it to me, and it's a world that I am not as familiar with unless I'm listening to, somebody who's advocating towards it. And as we start to hear the people here and the people outside representing the different groups, we sort of learn from it, and hopefully we learn from it, and I can advocate on behalf of, Sensitive or Kathy or somebody, and everyone can do it for everyone else. It's not just me representing perchance LDADR, it's everybody as they learn from me and vice versa. And I love that, because it was so, the fact that it wasn't rehearsed, they decided to do it completely on their own, right? So we have advocacy at all different levels, and I think that we can just look at situations like that and realize, okay, we're learning from everyone that we can possibly learn from, right? And the responsibility, they're taking it upon themselves, and we think that we, help our students, they can sort of represent themselves very well as well. I just love that they do.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. Okay. Does anybody else have anything they want to add?
Okay, I would have said it in my other part, but I don't know if you caught Global News, and it's been going around on Facebook, had a feature about the cost of cochlear implant replacement, because they now last 3 years under warranty. It's about $1,000 per year to extend the warranty for 1 year, and replacement costs for 2 years are about $25,000 in Ontario. If you move to Nova Scotia, it's free. Saskatchewan, it's about $800, and so some of the members of Voice and Deaf, Hard of Hearing Children are trying to advocate for Ontario to pay more than what ADP provides, because without private funding or privilege, you see that you have devices that cannot be repaired, that cannot be maintained, and I'm on Facebook groups where people are trying to find obsolete equipment to keep being able to hear. And I just think it's interesting that children, and now they're not cochlear implant users, they're wearing hearing aids, but they're very aware from a very early age, out of necessity, parents, unfortunately, and I sometimes realize I'm passing on anxiety, but look after it. It's worth a lot of money, and we all do it with good intention, but they know about how much the FM, they're not right about their numbers, but it's very expensive equipment. And so FM's hearing resource teacher doesn't want them getting lost. The teacher doesn't want to have to worry when things get broken. Like all of those pieces, you hear it so naturally coming out. As soon as they, this is my FM, and it costs money, and my hearing aids cost a lot of money too, because same issue, and not to the same extent, but hearing aids are partially covered but not fully, et cetera, et cetera. So when you know about the issue, then you know better. And so Global News did it, it's on YouTube now. It's about a 3-minute segment with little babies who have a genetic condition in their family. So the 2 babies, 2 years old and just being born, both are gonna need cochlear implants, and how do you pay for that? How do you let your children hear if you want them to hear? And so I just think it's interesting that out of the mouth of babes, right? It's this issue in our community that doesn't get talked about a lot, but in hearing resource, like when we're thinking about hearing this month, it's all the time. And the board is phenomenal that pays for the hearing like the FMs, but the home isn't. If the home can't afford upgrading to a better technology, they can't. And then the children have to deal with that.
Thank you, that's actually fantastic knowledge, because it just sounds to me like that hearing privilege, it seems the way it's set up in Ontario, it becomes a privilege, and that's just not how it should be. It should be a right. It should be accessible for children.
Yeah. And even with good jobs, you're not getting that full coverage. No.
Yeah. That's good to know. Does anybody else have any comments? Thank you very much, Lisa and Connor, appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, so we're gonna move on to our 20 minutes of, roughly 20 minutes of open discussion, and it's gonna really, oh, sorry, I jumped one. You had the, you covered it already, we're good. No, yeah, that was part of it, okay, fantastic. Sorry, number 9 was a 23-24 inclusive student services plan that Andrew covered in for admin report, so. We are focused this month on our reports to the Finance Committee with respect to the budget. And there's a couple of things to highlight. And I just want to make sure that if there's anything we vote on, that we vote on it before Senator Net has to vote. Because I think it's really important. So one of the things that jumped out at me, and I sort of want to throw this at the beginning of it, just because it's a concern that I have, is that there's a couple issues with this. Part of it relates to the budget, and then part of it relates to the recent sort of announcement around it as well. Is this specialist high skills major allocation? It was moved, I guess, into the GSN or whatever this year, and it's actually been reduced by almost half. So that is the basically promoting of the trades, right? Sort of helping, directing kids into the trade. So it was funded in 2022-23 year at $491,000. that funding's gone down to 285,000. At the same time, they roll out sort of this big announcement, and I have some concerns around what they're proposing with the announcement, but that kids can move from grade 11 into, basically skip grade 12, go right into the trades. And I guess some things that I have concerns with around that is, what does that do with respect to their high school diploma? Do they get one? Because things happen in life, right? People take different directions, and on average, they say that each person will have 3 different careers in their life, not even jobs, but careers, right? And without that high school degree, like diploma, are we gonna limit these kids by saying, okay, forget grade 12 if you really just wanna go into the trades? And I feel like the vast majority, like there's gonna be a significant number of the kids who we represent who are gonna be, sort of directed into that. And what happens if there's an injury and they can't do the trade that they once did? And are they gonna be limited moving forward? So I think that's a concern that I have with that. And then there's the whole maturity and growth thing, right? Like, some of these fields can be pretty dangerous, right? So you've got kids who are still 16 years old, where you'd be looking at whipping them into a trade that could potentially be quite dangerous, right? Especially talking electrical or any of them, they're using tools and things like that. And not always under the same kind of supervision they would within a classroom at the school, right? So I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts around that, but my thought is whether or not SEAC would want to bring some of the, concerns, any concerns we might have around it to the attention of the ministry. Because I would not want to see unintended consequences for kids, that would then have to try and figure that out down the road. So, go ahead, Elizabeth.
If a person in the trades who didn't have grade 12 decided to change careers, I think it's likely there would be some retraining, like perhaps college level, and how would a college view that application? Would they take into account the work experience having completed grade 12, or do you think they would just say?
I suspect they would, and even mature student status is a thing,
Mature students, you need to go to school for a year. And so a high school diploma, we recognize why it's valuable, but we also can recognize that there are many paths. Like, you can go to law school with no undergraduate degree. So a person who drops out of high school can go and do upgrading and go directly into law school. And I think that the paths are a lot more fluid than they were. Every year they seem to be more fluid, where you can transfer from university to college, college to university. And the trades, by and large, and not in all, like, when we talk trades, if you're talking electrician, you need grade 12 physics. So that's a very different context than carpentry, where you need grade 10 math. So they're not all gonna look or sound or feel the same when they make the announcement versus the minutia that you can't be 15 and have your grade 12 physics, you won't be there yet. So I think that what's tricky about it is merely considering what of this is our bias, and what of this is the reality that we want, and what of this is helping kids find success, and what of this is prioritizing an economic need, right? Because we know that there's an economic need driving a lot of this, but I also think that we know that some students learn better with something in their hands than a chair under their butt. And so I think that I've been very uncomfortable with a lot of the conversation about de-streaming, because it tends to suggest that you have to keeping your options open is coded language for being able to go to university. And a person in the trades is going to college for that trades work. When you're an apprentice and you do 5 years of training, you're highly skilled and often able. So I've had teachers come into my department who went into the trades, and now they're teachers. They're highly skilled, highly knowledgeable, incredibly thoughtful, and have a university degree in education. There's a million ways to get where we're all going to the workplace eventually, for the most part. How we got there is a question mark of where we go, like, so yeah, like, is there safety? Is it being supervised? If they're young, under 18, are we supervising it? Are we tying them to schools? Because my assumption is probably that this is part of OEP and this is gonna be part of co-op and things like that, where they're probably getting safe. Do we want clarity on that? Do we wanna make sure they're thinking about that? Sure, I think we should be promoting that there's supervision that's protecting that child, like a prudent parent would. But I question how much of our bias about closing doors. I don't know. I don't know.
My children went to a different board, and we went to the fair that talked about all the different alternative ways to get your high school diploma. Apprenticeship was part of it, and your high school diploma was inclusive of it. Because most apprenticeship programs have a small amount of college level courses that you need to be able to take. So they make sure that they have their high school equivalency as well as they have access to those courses. So when I looked at it, it was like a percentage of hands-on training with somebody who already has their designation and in-school learning. But I'd like to see what this program has and if there's any changes, because my children have been out of high school for a decade.
Right? Yeah, I just think, you know, I just wanna make sure that our kids are not gonna be like, you know, I take your point in looking at advice with keeping your options open. However, I know myself that that there can be still barriers. Regardless of having gone to post-secondary after, right, and received a college diploma, there are still doors that, believe it or not, are closed. There are cases where somebody is more than qualified for something, but because they're missing that piece that employer wants to see, that door is in fact closed.
Yeah.
You know, you can have 30 years work experience in the same field, but this employer wants to see that document. And without it, that door remains closed. And I think that's a bit of a concern that I have, because I don't think university is the be all and end all, and trades are perfectly acceptable. My husband went through the trades programs, and he's a master electrician and, well, project manager now, but I believe in many paths to success, and that the kids should have the options. I just feel that if they're going to, you know, we need to, I think what I would like clarification from the government on is that these kids are gonna have that, if they're moving them into, yes, exactly, if they're being moved into this program instead of grade 12, that is still going to qualify them for that graduation, where they're still gonna get that piece of paper that's not going to, regardless of their qualifications, because that one employer wants to limit them. And I think that's my perspective on it, but.
Erin, can we elbow this? Do you want me to put this conversation into the deputation for finance committee, or is this a separate conversation?
I think part of it is a separate conversation, which is why I wanted, since it's sort of still here, to see whether or not we as a committee wanted to like get some
Okay, so
clarifications around from the ministry level.
I wanted to get through this.
Yes,
Since
yeah.
while she's still here, so
Yeah.
we have two things, okay, that's fine.
It's kind of.
So loud.
They're kind of.
We need you sometimes.
As you should.
There you are, there's a lot of things, right? There's a lot of kind of important stuff.
Yeah.
And then we'll add it as one of the concerns.
Okay, yeah, I just basically wanted to know whether or not maybe we wanted to think of a letter to the ministry asking for some clarifications around these things. I haven't decided anything, sorry. Right?
They have no tech teachers and, sorry.
Well, that's my point, like, if you're gonna move this forward, like, maybe we can, by raising these concerns and asking for clarification ahead of time, maybe it'll prevent some dropping of balls along the way, right? That make they'll think about things that they weren't otherwise thinking. My perspective. I mean, it would be group 6, and we would need a motion for a letter, yeah.
I motion for the letter.
Okay, any seconders? Any seconders? Yeah. Rowan, all in favor? Okay, I'm happy to draft it if
Go for
anybody
it.
else wants to. do a draft then for the next meeting.
Thank you, Eva. I think there was a lot of questions raised around the table, and we'd like to have some clarification.
Yeah.
Like Kathy said,
No, I have no issue as far as
who knows what those answers will be?
Who's teaching all these classes? I'm just saying.
right, exactly, especially if the funding's not,
There's no bringing logic into this.
okay, so now we move on to the budgets, because that's part of it, and, Tara, did you wanna, lean on that, or
Sure.
since we're,
So
you guys are
thank you,
together on that?
Andrea, for helping a girl out on all that. So did anybody get a chance to look at what was here? This is full transparency. This is basically a copy paste with adjustments from sort of, we have a kind of a typical template that we have that we've sort of provided. The first couple of slides, I guess, Andrea, are you into?
Oh, here, guys,
Yeah, I have it, we have paper copies and I have it on the screen, so just give me when you want the
Okay.
slides, that Lisa made everybody copies of the current version.
You're my new best friend.
well, she did, so that we can make notes at the bottom here,
Yeah.
and then that way we can give them to Tara and send her at the end, so that they can go.
I'll do changes last.
And to do some changes live as well. Okay.
So, the first, slide is titled Pie. The second page is, really just sort of like our guiding principles, just based on this and sort of the regulations that come out of the Education Act around special education. Basically that we are required to provide exceptional pupils with programs and services that are appropriate for their needs, so kind of all of that language, and then therefore we, as the DDSB and the trustees, have that obligation to ensure that we're meeting those needs and providing those services. So it's wonderful language. Recommendations for inclusion, so again, sort of all back to that lens, we've been talking about equity and inclusion, inclusive student services, saying that we have to make sure that we are including all of our exceptional pupils within those processes, referring to Human Rights Commission, our K-12 educational standards to promote inclusion and success. I did have a question. Do we want to make reference to the AODA? Because it's sort of in that whole equity and inclusion sort of thing.
Yeah, what do we have on there? Education regulations, human rights, human rights,
The K-12 education standards community, and then the
but there's, and there's
AUA
also,
standards.
and there's also the Human Rights Commission policy on special education. That's separate from the right to read.
So do you want to, post language, so.
Yeah.
If anybody has any comments or questions on anything that they've seen or read, please, I think this is sort of big discussion time. And then, human rights. And then, the third bullet, I think, is actually duplicate from the last slide. So we probably can remove the third bullet. And it's basically, so there's a couple, we always try and put a couple of yays, in to say, good job, that, because, it's not all doom and gloom all the time. So, we've got our intentional focus for, the early math intervention, reading and de-streaming supports. I know we've got some controversy with some of the de-streaming intention, for summer learning supports. I think we've also, as we had talked about, that there's the funding for the additional 5 roles, the 3 speech paths and psychometrists.
This is internal to the district,
Right.
not from the grants.
Okay, all right.
We're still in the draft, but it's
Yes.
significantly above the funding.
Yeah, that's the not so yay part. So we usually try and at least put in a couple of yays in there, just to sort of highlight some stuff that's at least good coming out of the GSS.
Summer learning support's a little contentious too, because it was so specific, that there wasn't enough flexibility in how funds could be.
We are still waiting for the rules of expenditure for mental health.
There's a lot of wait and see still going on in here, so.
We're supposed to have it by the end of the month, so Tuesday's great. But the summer learning dollars for students with special education needs was clearly articulated, attached to reading, and it did give the nod that the ministry does expect to repeat the funding in 2024. So that is accurate to the learning side. It's the mental health side we are still waiting for the how we can best use $311,600 thoughtfully for kids.
I'm sure you guys will find a way.
We have a few plans, we're just waiting to see if they fit within the rules.
Excellent.
Okay, and then the next ones are, so these are some of the concerns that have kind of come out. Hang on, I've got a bit more information on a couple of these. So changes to transportation funding, I guess it's they're messing about with the funding model. Yay. It's still based on the number of routes that we had last year, and because we are in a growth scenario, we're probably going to be extra underfunded by the time the funding model comes in. The other piece on that as well is additional funding. It gets tagged in for our students with special needs. So transportation isn't its own real envelope, like it's not, we don't get really extra ton of money on this from the school board, but basically a school board's number of eligible special transportation needs is $500 a kid. Not really great. It costs us more than that. Most of our transportation needs are for our children with exceptional needs, so we need the wheelchair accessible busing, we need the shorter buses, and the vans with the appropriate thing. As well as there was a change in the benchmark, that they're no longer providing a benchmark for taxis or vans. We use taxis and vans in this board because we don't have enough buses that are wheelchair accessible, so we use that, so we're going to, yeah.
What, I need to hear that again.
They're no longer providing a benchmark for taxi or vans.
I'll try and channel Rowan in the invitation. So currently, within the fleet of vehicles that Durham Student Transportation, the consortium uses, we have the 72 passengers, which become 48s when kids are older, bigger bodies. And then we have the 18s, and then we sometimes use caravans and taxis. Currently, all of those vehicles qualify as educational transportation. Under the new model, taxis and caravans are carved off and are not qualifying vehicles. So within the funding, as I understand it, because I'm trying to get my head around all the changes as well. Within the funding, there is some money for local priorities within transportation, such as if driver fees are different region to region or different things like gas costs and things like that. So there is a local priorities amount built into the transportation fee. And the wording is that if you need cabs and caravans, build it in there. But they no longer qualify as vehicles. For us currently, based on routing in place today, there are 14 caravans routed within, for Durham students, and our number of taxis that we use greatly fluctuates, because you can imagine between some student needs from accommodations perspective on a short-term basis, a broken leg, a hip, and also sometimes being assistive to getting kids to mental health services that don't exist one municipality to another. We are grateful of our partnership with a few of the taxi services locally to move. My understanding is there are some districts, more northern wards, that caravans are more primary in terms of their use because they don't have 72 kids that go from this place to this place. And so caravans allow them to move kids. So it is a concern, but they're no longer qualifying vehicles.
Is that discriminatory, particularly to a student who needs to get there quickly? Like, you think about, I don't know, the kid who's sensitive to cold. They can't sit for long term or whatever, like, there's reasons why we use the, like.
Yeah, and some of, being fully transparent, some of our caravans are outfitted with plexiglass dividers as well, for kids that, shared space. And then in congestion with traffic is a concern where a school bus, even an 18-passenger with accessibility would not meet needs.
Absolutely.
And so sometimes we use them as transitional teaching, vehicles so that we can maintain access to school while we do some of that, independence and learning, sensory.
So is this ministry mandated?
That is ministry guideline changes, that the ministry is no longer funding caravans and taxis as qualifying vehicles.
So I think that's a separate letter.
I see it as a big problem, especially for children that are classified as medically fragile. Those children usually go in a single taxi all by themselves based on medical needs.
Absolutely.
And I don't know how they would get to school
That's the problem.
without that option.
Yeah. So I imagine the response would be, we've allowed, not we, the ministry, we've allowed for it within the local priorities. The challenge is how much gets shifted there with that being a boxed allowance as well.
Because even operationally, it's for students who may not be able to necessarily climb the 3 or 4 steps to be able to get onto that 18-passenger as well.
Or can't wait for 17 other people to get on, like, or off, or like, yeah.
I also think of how big the region is. So for some regions, you may only have 1 or 2 children that need transportation. So they wouldn't need a big bus. There'd be 70 empty spots.
Yeah. And of course, a couple of our caravans then into the classes that have a far broader geographic pull. But we're moving 4 or 5 kids to school. Sometimes we will draw on a caravan to do that. Because the other challenge operationally that sits beside that is limitation on actually bus vehicles. So the 18s, which are the numbers refer to the number of people we can load onto the buses, sorry. So the smaller buses are usually the ones that are fully accessible. There's a limit to how many buses we can actually, the services, the board doesn't own any buses, are available, and same with the 72. So a lot of times bus companies will purchase from other bus companies, and because of Canadian standards, we can only, bus operators in Ontario have very limited pull because of the high safety standards rightfully for children. So for instance, we can't purchase buses from south of the border because of the safety features are much different. And so it's not a matter of just popping them on a bigger bus.
And am I correct that local priorities funding is not funding that's guaranteed to happen each and every year?
I would have to ask Associate Director Wright about more of that, because it may just be a common language used within the new transportation funding. I don't think it sits as the same context of what we were calling local priorities funding a number of years ago. I think it's the phrase is popping up again, but in a different context, I believe, but I would have to check with Dave on that.
Yeah, that clarification on that would be great, simply because my understanding was previously the local priorities funding was like, here's a chunk of money to use where you think it's needed.
Correct.
But we can't promise you're gonna get this next year.
It was a short-term element.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was my understanding.
It was tied to agreements that
Yeah.
then became supports for students funding, the acronym changed.
Right.
So I do think it's the same term popping up in different contexts, but I would want to shoulder check that with.
Yeah, we
with
should
Dave.
probably clarify that, just because I think that's important to know.
So does that mean that taxis wouldn't be allowed, so if the student's living in Port Perry wants to do a dual credit, and probably there's no public transit unless I get them.
There's no ministry funding for it, and we can't apply the charge under transportation funds, so if we were to provide it as a district, we need to find it somewhere else within the operating budget.
Got it.
Cause I think there's the paying for it and there's the providing it, and usually we like the two to be in alignment.
Together, yes, this is very helpful. So, yeah, so transportation generally tends to be a bit of a sticking point, for our kids. Especially sort of back to the, in a lot of cases, it's their only way to get to school or to participate at school. If they don't get transportation, they don't go. Like that sort of thing, like I have a lot of my son's friends, same thing, they can't get a bus. They don't go to school because they can't do online, like online does not work for them, like just from the different pathways available, they're not there that time. So transportation is essential for a lot of our kids, to be able to get there, and then all of the very, kids that can't get on the bus, anything that's wheelchair accessible, that, all those sorts of things, so that's a big one for us, it's a big chunk of funding that we don't really get a whole lot of support on from special education funding in general. The education development charge deficit, so this is really essentially that because we're a growth district, we're still being funded at really archaic levels, based on 2006 census data. So the Ministry of Education still thinks that we have the same number of kids from 2006. When that's not true, I don't even know what the gap is now, it's in the tens of thousands. Yeah, it's significantly different. Yeah, I mean, and they're saying that and every time we raise this conversation and say, you have your own student system, it's called ONSTIS, the Ontario Student Information System, that you've mandated every school and every board to enter every piece of information about this child there, but they can't use that information because it's not valid, but the census data is. Sorry, I'm getting on my high horse on this one. And we have had a long form census 10 years later, even if they moved us to 2016, 2015, 2016 census data, that'd be a step in the right direction. But they're still stuck in the 2006, and I have no idea. We've mentioned this a few times, we're kind of.
I feel like there's one reason and one reason only. Is that to do so, they know they're going to have to dramatically increase the funding. That's the reason not to, because there's no logical reason otherwise, is to say, to knowing, except for to knowingly underfund that, right? And we pointed that out repeatedly. We have done many letters to the ministry saying, you need to change the funding formula, in particular for special education. I think the challenge with education development charges, those are what are charged to developers when they're building to help cover the cost of services to development charges in general. Education and regular development charges is basically designed for development to pay for itself, right? So when a new development comes in, it's supposed to cover the cost of bringing sewer and, like electrical lines and all the services you need, road widening if necessary, and education development charges are for money towards building the necessary schools to fund, to service the kids that will be moving into that area. And I don't know, and I would have to look into it. I do know, I think the way it's currently stated with the new legislation that's come out about building homes faster or something, is that if a developer sells a house at 80% as affordable housing at 80% of what they would charge for it typically, is considered to be affordable housing, and therefore would be exempt from some of the charges. So, but there's been no indication, and I'm assuming that must be also affecting development charges, the education development charges. There's no current plan from the government to reimburse municipalities, and I'm gonna guess school boards would have to look into that more, for that funding to date. So that means it falls on the backs of everybody else.
Yeah, so EDCs or the education development charge becomes frozen, and there's only certain amounts, periods of time, windows of time, that districts can apply for the amount per building to be changed. And so that is coming up shortly. But what we can do is circulate, so, the business department capital for the buildings. Melissa did a really nice overview on the deficit and how much that's meant, like how much the gap is opening in Durham region, in the draft budget book. So what we can do is circulate that in a separate email, just as its own standalone on this. Melissa, we have two individuals, so you've met Jen Machen. Jen comes in on the operations side, she is a partner. Melissa Durward, who does the building structures and capital side, and the two of them become the financial super team supporting Dave as CFO of the district.
And I'm assuming too, with the new builds, more time and money is being put into the accessibility side of the new buildings, and the cost of building is also increased, right?
The price per square foot has gone up, it's gone up, correct.
So, yeah, it's a concern.
A lot to do with materials.
Oh, so there, thanks, Data. I won't beat that dead horse anymore. Special incidents portion, I think we've talked that one to death as well, but it still bears repeating that it is significantly lower than the cost of just even, it doesn't even cover the salary of one of the staffs, support staff for each student, so it is a significant shortfall. And as far as I know, it's an interim formula. Number of things, I guess, from last year, just to keep going, but we're gonna change it, we're gonna try and change the formula again, but still no data in terms of what that's gonna be yet.
Going under review during the 23-24 school year.
Yeah, so the information that I'm getting is that we'll just assume we're gonna get what we got last year, but we don't know.
Just before you switch slides, so slide 5 is very text heavy,
Yes.
and slide 6 is a bit lighter. Do you mind if I play with them after just to balance them?
Yeah.
I will put the census data with the education development charges, knowing that those two are a bit tied.
Sounds good.
You're welcome.
So overall, I think, based on the revenue from the GSNs, we are, and based on our known expenditures, we are at about a shortfall of over 3 million from revenues to expenditures. We have been very blessed, the board always finds ways of topping those up to meet at least our expenditures for stuck ed, so that's sort of a recommendation to say, please continue to do that, we really appreciate that. You know, again, we know that it's a scenario that they've got to find it from somewhere else. So there's choices that have to be made, but we really do appreciate the fact that we're trying to find ways to support our kids. So that's just sort of make sure, please keep doing that. And that we still always want to be included in any of our in feedback in that whole process to give them insight and overview. And working in partnership is sort of that, sort of our catchphrase with that. And then I think we also still want to see what was the physical, like the mental and physical health for everybody. Sort of where does that sit? So again, mental health is a big deal these days, given everything that's gone on in the last few years. So just thank you for everything. We've got a lot of different things. So there's the $3 million that we're talking about in the first bullet point, saying that's sort of the shortfall that we know about right now. Again, there's still a couple of pieces that we still don't have quite the numbers on yet. We're waiting. So it may be better, it may be less. It's not gonna wipe it out by any stretch of the imagination. Maybe a few tens of thousands of dollars one way or the other, I don't know. But again, we won't know until we see the actual final information from there. And then those are the sort of 5 goals that we talked about, Andrea spoke of earlier.
So we do, when we continue to advise and make our recommendations, the board, we are lobby the government and work with our organizations around the table to continue to advocate for our children. And we write a lot of letters, so it's fancier words for that, but that's what we do. We try to at least affect some change for our kids. And then the last one is just sort of like a thank you, and then we have everyone's sort of role and thing there, just so that they're aware of all of us on the committee. Let's kind of, I have 5 minutes to say, so it's quick. So is there anything in particular that you would like me to spend my 5 minutes on? Because I mean, these are just bullet points and things, and we talked through a bunch of different things. Is there anything that anyone especially would like me to speak to? Anything else that they?
Maybe wishful thinking, but the moving of the census data could possibly be like a solution that's actually doable. And bring great change to the region as well.
It would, it's not the board's ability to do anything about that, that's the only problem, it's the Ministry of Education has to make that decision, so we can continue to do that. Is there anything for here to stress to the finance committee that we would like to make sure that they tackle? Like, I know transportation seems to have been a big topic. Did we want to talk about anything else? Just sort of, because
I think it's your only time to talk to the trustees about this stuff, and some of them are gonna be having conversations where, like, and so, like, we don't wanna spend a ton of time on something they can't change, but change gets affected in many ways. And so there's a lot of people who are trustees who've never sat on SEAC, who may or may not have experience, and there's a bunch who really do get SEAC too. So I think advocating for the census and transportation both make sense, because they're gonna be talking to MPPs, they're gonna be in meetings potentially where they could affect change in different ways, or become MPPs themselves sometimes. So this is our 5 minutes with them. But can we also thank Tara for always doing budget?
Yeah, I was just gonna say.
She's such a rock star with the budget.
Better you than me.
Well,
Yeah.
That's good. The only other piece that we didn't put in here, but I didn't have in there was a huge drop between last year and this upcoming year for Indigenous education. It was about 7.5 million last year, or this current year, and it's dropping to just under 3.9 million. So about 49% decrease in Indigenous,
in funding for Indigenous education.
wow.
Yeah.
Do we wanna put a line just about how equity intersects with special education, and so all support for Indigenous education and the work of recognizing like culturally relevant pedagogy or something like that, like our kids need to be seen in all of their facets, right?
That's right, yeah. And we know that when you know, each point of marginalization that a child touches increases the level of that marginalization.
And we tend to identify more students from some communities than others.
Exactly.
And Indigenous is one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Statement about that.
Put that in there. Very quick side note, a good friend of mine who was a teacher many years ago, remember telling me that he was teaching in an Indigenous classroom. He told me that the classroom was in the basement of a bar downtown. And, you know, there's a discussion there already, but the ceiling was painted in tar, so there was no leakage. And yeah, that put something in there, because it just, I bet for the comment, it just that there is that correlation that's strong, and I think sometimes at a higher level, maybe numbers can easily be moved around. but, they're representative of somebody, you know, so I think, yeah, that's at least so we can speak our point, and whatever they do, at least we've done what we're supposed to do.
And a lot of that, just in terms of, like, Kathy, your point's super valid, there's a lot of really new people around the table, this time around, so they may not necessarily have that view into what happened last year versus what's happening this year. So it's probably good to continue to sort of call them out. The only other thing I just saw is taxes. So apparently EI and CPP increases are not reflected in the GSNs either, so we actually have to pay for all the additional increase in taxes as well. We're not getting money for that right now. So yeah, that's, hopefully they'll fix that. That's not which is awesome.
So, I don't know, as far as the concerns around, you know, the intersectionality of different groups in special education, you know, we do have the inclusive student services plan, the education plan, there's we could sort of toss in there something similar to this. As a district, we acknowledge this systemic ableism and other forms of discrimination are deeply embedded within the education system and structures. This discriminates against disadvantaged and causes harm to students with neurodivergent traits, different abilities and disabilities, and other intersecting identities. For example, based on ancestry, race, gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, creed, religion, socioeconomic status, etc. It also contributes to and perpetuates disparities and disproportionate educational access opportunities, experiences, and outcomes. You know, so we might want to put something similar to that, but, you know, say, you know, that SEAC recognizes that there's, you know, systemic ableism within the system, and, you know,
And you care for all.
and we care for all kids, yeah.
Question, you speak for 5 minutes, do they get a copy of the PowerPoint?
Yes.
So, Ed Finance, the last couple meetings, we've had a challenge maintaining quorum in space. And so one of the options is for a written submission to all of the trustees. Which I think is part of the power of having all of the members listed on the last slide, the final slide as well. You always do such a beautiful job of speaking to it. But sometimes that can give the optics of 1 or 2 members bringing it forward on behalf of, where sometimes a written submission can sit as culmination from committee. So if we'd had a robust room for the 2 meetings, I would say speak it into the room. My concern is you would be booking an evening and we may or may not have a quorum. So in terms of that, like the PowerPoint's position to go written, if that would be the will of the group, but also willing and welcome to do verbal presentation along with it too.
Yeah, I'm okay, I like having they do get a copy, usually Kristen's very good, she usually will want a written copy, like latest submission for Monday, usually it's Wednesday.
Yes,
So
and
then
it goes into the package.
and it goes into their budget, and the full document package, so at least have that. I have no problem, I've already planned on being there. So sit in the gallery and do the
Yeah.
thing, if,
I am concerned that we won't have quorum.
Yeah.
SEAC's deputation is the only item on the agenda.
of course it is.
And so, and we have had trouble getting quorum the last 2 education finance committee meetings.
Okay.
So I don't know if
When do we have
it
to
will
have
serve
written, when do we have to have written submission, I guess? Then. Is there
it would
different-
circulate in lieu of the agenda. Like, the agenda would circulate with it attached as a written submission.
Right.
I'm just concerned about coming into a space and then sitting and having no quorum. And then it going with the optics of it's missing some of the information that would be verbally presented.
Mhm.
Whereas a written submission goes, this is the fulsome package from SEAC.
Okay.
But not to influence the table, just, those are facts and reality of our last 2 meetings.
only thing I would say is that transportation bullet was so much more robust and meaningful after conversation. So,
And they've had, like, part of that is, they've presented that as a challenge within the expenditures, in terms of that trustee, in terms of the trustee group, at Ed Finance last Wednesday.
Does it? With the interest of effecting some type of change, does it make more sense to, and I don't know, to go with what we feel are the top two priorities, or do we find out what the finance team has as their top two priorities and sort of emphasize that? Do you see what I mean? And in terms of like, yeah, this is more people saying, get on board and get these things done, or they've got their ideas and now we give ours and they say, well, we've already got ours. I don't know what we're, I guess bringing to the table something that is new is good for them because they might not have that in their purview, but at the same time, if we bring something to the table that they're already looking at, will that further affect some type of change? I don't know.
So in terms of a sequence of events that have occurred, and so there have been 2 education finance committee meetings. One was an overview of revenue, so the overview of the GSMs coming into district. That meeting was fairly close to us receiving the documentation, so initial analysis went forward, and the budget team, or the finance team from our board does a really good job of publishing as a book format, and here's all the details. And so in that first meeting, the first half of the book on revenue, so money into the district, went forward. And then in the second meeting last week, how the senior team working with department teams put a proposal forward for the draft budget for the expenditures. And so that's where the 5 positions of regulated health professionals are in the draft budget. The amount that Tara referenced at expenditures that are $3 million above the envelope coming, like the money coming in for special education, there's a $3 million overspend plugged into that. And again, Tara's spoken to, it's not an overspend of the district, it's an overspend of the special education money pulling from other areas. And so that has gone forward to board. Trustee Morton chairs education finance this year. Chair Edwards spoke really thoroughly about the transportation risks and the challenge of that funding and the impact direct to students with special education needs, and how intensively tied the transportation funding and access to those routings is tied to the experience of kids. So that's gone into the space. I think a lot of the challenges being brought forward in terms of census, the development fees, are ministry purview for impact and not in the purview locally of expenditures. So where SEAC looks to see a robust mapping of dollars for special education services, the draft budget has that $3 million overspend in it. The draft budget on a net neutral year has 5 additional staffing. We're up a couple special education classes as well. So in a year of equal or less, special education is taking additional. So enrollment projections took a bit care of a bit of that. We were $6 million over intentionally this year. So that has come down to $3 million. As enrollments come up, we've reduced the overspend back to a little bit more of a narrowing. So in those conversations, because you also have Trustee Oldfield, Trustee Miller, Trustee Edwards as alternative to SEAC, really understanding and listening around this table, bringing that in. So it just depends. But I just, again, not to influence the table, but we have had a challenge getting quorum. And so that room may not run if there's not quorum in the space.
Well, how about this then? What I can do is, Erin, thank you very much for doing this live updates. I can take this back with the two things, I think, just kind of highlighting these two pieces that we was in terms of talk about, I'll adjust for points on those to maybe give to some of the speaking notes that I'd be giving anyway. And then that can at least suffice to say this is why we're concerned, saying, you know, it's a concern, but here's really why. And if I have to add an extra slide or whatever in order just to carve transportation out specifically, I can do that. I'll do that. Yes, and then since I'll send to you as well, and there's a second set of eyes. And we can send out to everybody so we can have a last go at it. So I think I'll have to submit it to Kristen on Monday.
Yeah. I just wanna add one more thing, that sometimes, especially if you've got trustees who've not ever sat around the SAM table, they don't always know how that impacts these kids with special education needs, some of the issues around these. So we wanna make sure that they understand what SEAC's position is on these things as well, so that they don't just think it's, you know what I mean, so they understand the seriousness of it, not just from the perspective of some trustees that know, and that, but also from this table saying, no, this is really important and here's why, right? And I think that's.
Yeah, I like providing the examples of like, let's say you're, you know, a child who is medically fragile that can't get on a bus, they usually use a taxi because it's the only thing that they could get in safely and get to school safely. So those kinds of things, just very specific, you know, examples of all of the reasons why it's important that we have to continue to try to address this. I'll pull that in as well.
Maybe I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll add that paragraph in. I just want to be flipping through my screen, so on the big screen. Thank you. And then I'll send it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Sandra, appreciate that.
All right, so is everybody good, are we doing it, are we looking at doing it submission, like written submission? So it's in whatever package regardless of whether they go into that day or a different day?
Yeah, I think if I update it so that it qualifies for written submission to give us that background, if I'm gonna go anyway, if there's quorum, I'll just read it, it'll be great. If there's no quorum, then at least they have it, and they have the points that I'd be making on outside that, so.
Where and when is the meeting?
Wednesday here, I think in the big room, over there, that way, usual 7, 6:37, somewhere there.
It should be on the calendar, it should be on the board's calendar.
These are,
Feel free to come.
Probably will. Will be a great process.
We're the only deputation on books at the moment, so it'll be.
I think it
probably
would be
quiet.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so I just want to be clear that we're doing a letter on the specialist high skills major, a letter on van taxis. I don't know that we made a motion for a letter for vans and taxis to the ministry saying, hey. First, okay, any seconders? Tara, all in favor? Okay, motion is passed. Sure, that would be great. Yeah, that'd be fantastic. I don't know, did you want to do a letter to the ministry? Apparently, if the SIP is going under review, do we want to try and influence that review? That would be a third letter.
We've done the steps multiple times.
Well, it's under review, it's going under review, right? We've lobbied the ministry many times to raise that. But if we're going to push, if they're going under review, it'd be a good time to push not only the census, again, to push the census information and the true cost, right? And how underfunded it is. And they should be taking that into consideration during their review. Because one of the things that the review should include is using more current census data, right? Like that just seems to me to be, right? Go ahead.
Do we
want to just do like a greatest hits album at this point, like really, like we've done all of the advocating, like could we go back to the last 3 letters we've written?
Yeah.
And just be like, we're so happy you're finally considering this, like, well, maybe, thank you for considering this, we're so glad you're hearing their concerns. A reminder, as we said, like, and just literally re-quote ourselves.
Yeah, I would definitely just pull up the letters,
I
the
think
last letter we did it again, and just say like, our understanding is this is going under review. It, you know, and given the fact that it is going under review, we want you to consider these things in your review.
Yeah, I have to admit that I haven't read these letters that are in correspondence, but I noticed they're about SIP too, so I don't, would they contain anything that we could say we also support what they're saying?
I think their letters are in support of us.
Everybody else that's already
That's what they're saying.
Yeah.
But I mean, the angle now is this is
Yeah.
going under review,
Yeah.
don't ignore us,
Yeah.
right? And if it's going under review, don't ignore us, so. Right? And you know, I still think copying shadow ministers is not a bad idea. Right? Because it should be out there to everybody that what we're advocating for, I think. So. Because in the past, we used to just send it to the minister and copy the other CX, but if you're copying the other party's shadow ministers, then they're aware of what we're asking for too, when it comes to special education, right? It's out there in general, so. All right, moving on then to the business arising from the minutes. Just a reminder of the student recognition night is on on Monday. If anybody is able to, wanted to attend that, just let Lisa know, like, you know, now, today, or, you know, sort of by the end of the week. The other one, was already covered, that the SEAC survey note has gone out. And I think that was arising from the minutes. That's good. Okay, the association and committee reports, I know you've sent around, do you wanna talk about that? Because I think that's.
Yes, we're having a picnic on June the 11th at Centennial Park in Etobicoke. I know it's far for people in Durham, but she wanted to do it in that location because at Christmas time we did it in the East End. So all other associations are welcome to attend, not just our association, and I'll send it off to some of the schools.
Right, excellent, thank you. There is a link on the electronic version that was sent around. If you want to share the flyer around, then people would go there to the event. I think it's the Eventbrite link to register for that event. So it sounds actually pretty fun. Yeah, it's like, yeah. Anybody else have any association reports?
Can I just share the YouTube video with Lisa to put in the minutes, so you guys can watch the news? Is that okay? Because that's what our association's been advocating for. It's mostly Halton region that's been doing most of the advocacy work, I'll be honest. But I think it's might be worth a minute if you want to see.
Yeah, I think that would be great.
Kathy, is it the report from May 24th?
Yeah, it was in the new, I think it got posted
Hearing should be.
23rd.
Okay.
Hearing shouldn't be for the privileged. Ontario Families Fight for Program Plan Coverage. It's a voice for deaf and hard of hearing family, but they don't say that, but.
Okay. Okay, then moving on to our correspondence, 2 letters from the Rainy Rivers District School Board and the Corporate Climbers School Board with respect to the SIP funding. And then the Ability Center, there's a therapeutic recreation summer program flyer is out, and I think that was in our package. Just so as of today, as of this morning, 12 of the 15 programs for the July program, 12 of the 15 seats have been registered for. And for the August 7 to the 15, and right now it's only open to DDSB until next Wednesday, like within the DDSB till next Wednesday, and then it's going region-wide. So if you know anybody that might be a factor for, share that flyer with them and ask them to register right away. Okay. Any questions with respect to that? Okay, moving on then to community concerns. Anybody have any community concerns?
I guess with the recent, I'm gonna say collector with horrible flyers that had gotten posted around, what's going on? Like, there's been a lot of angst about that, and just in terms of.
So as a district and as communities, and I appreciate as a resident of Ajax, proximal to where the hate and racism was. So there was a number of posters in community and some found in a couple of our schools, very explicitly anti-Black racism, hate. And so from an ISS perspective, we did have teams on site in all of those schools, supporting students. Messages did go out into each of those school communities. We do have Anthony with us as one of the impacted schools in leading families and students and staff through that as well. Our director has made a very clear statement in terms of that not being acceptable as a violation of our human rights policy. The incidents were in a very sharp dichotomy to an event that occurred last Thursday night, which was the living compendium of the district's actions around anti-Black racism. So we had the ability center filled, both in terms of elementary program supports and then every single one of our secondary schools in terms of youth leadership in anti-Black racism, both in terms of the classroom and school community. So it is something that we, as a district, we've taken a very firm stance on. It was named Lake Prairie rightfully as anti-Black racism and hate. The school teams are working with the impacted students who are at the center, both in terms of the original posters and who was at target most directed, but also appreciating the ripples from that. So just really sharp dichotomies within the district. That series of events in Ajax has coincided with the increase in messaging against 2S LGBTQIA communities and also an incidence of anti-Islamophobic racism in southern Ajax that the township was dealing with too. So we also appreciate how those three things may actually have intersectionality for some of our kids, staff, and families as well. Concurrent to that, I'm sure the table is aware as well. We did have at the most recent board meeting hate spoken into the space with a number of targets, and the director and chair did utilize both security on site and police on site to clear the gallery. And so since then, Director Williams-Taylor, on behalf of Board of Trustees, on behalf of senior team, have put statements out to all staff and all community that at this time, in order to stop the iteration of hate messages, our gallery is now closed for the remainder of the school year. And then we'll look at other options. So it's not to stop public questions and inquiry that have good purpose on, very similar to here, what is going on for kids? How do we move those practices? What do we need to listen to differently? But when that tips into messages of racism, harm, discrimination, then as a district, we need to take action to not do that. So our boardroom is now closed for the two remaining both standing committee and the board meeting for this year. The meeting will be continued to be publicly accessible. Both meetings are live streamed, such as SEAC is. So it is not a matter of closing off public access to good questions coming to us as two teams responsible for policy and operations. That remains a firm commitment of transparency and good dialogue. But when that trips into impacts of hate and racism for members of our community, staff, students, and families, then we stand by our human rights policy and the related procedures. So we have done so in terms of the experiences of anti-Black racism and hate posters in Ajax, in conjunction with the town of Ajax for the anti-Islamophobic racism, as well as the ongoing presence in terms of the LGBTQIA community as well. And part of that as well, I know flags are, and Associate Director Markowski spoke to it at the board meeting. Flags are not the sole strategy, it's how individuals experience our buildings moving through them. But we felt a very firm statement of commitment, given that it's also Pride Month coming in. So last Wednesday is the International Day Against Transphobia, Biphobia, and Homophobia, moving into Pride Month. The progressive Pride flag is flying at 100% of DDSB sites from May 17th to June 30th, non-negotiable. And so again, not moving between impacted groups, but just as an expression of understanding that quite often there's intersectionality for individuals as well. And making sure that we're clear on the policy and procedures guiding us, because they're founded in the Ontario Human Rights Code, of what should be expected experience in our schools and our communities where we have influence. You're welcome.
Any other community concerns this time? Any questions with respect to that concern? All right. Celebrations and successes, because after that, we need them.
Quick transition.
Yes.
May I just put a thank you into the room? So in terms of our elementary administrator reps and our secondary administrator reps, the two organizations have different election cycles. So at this time, we know that both Anthony and Dawn, who will be with us next month, are at the end of their 2-year term in terms of being the liaison with Inclusive Student Services. And so just while Anthony's here this evening, and then next month when we're together and Dawn's present, just wanted to thank both leaders in terms of bringing secondary voice into the space. There's a lot of times that we need away from SEAC. SEAC is one of the commitments that the liaison committee members make. Another one is we activate the leadership influence within some working groups that we're working on as well. And so just wanted to publicly thank Anthony, and then we'll do so with Dawn as they come to an end of a 2-year commitment. I don't believe we know yet. We don't know. Usually elementary does theirs a bit later. So just really wanted to, I think it is a celebration to have really tremendous leaders like those around the table invested in inclusion for our kids. So just wanted to say thank you.
Yeah, I will, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I wanted to put a thank you to the staff for doing so much. It is a busy time of year and we've had a very busy household, and I know a lot of boys' families have been talking about how wonderful it is not only to have events like the ones for deaf and hard of hearing children, but this week was science fair, and you know, my deaf child was at a band Canada's Wonderland event this week, and all this effort that's going in from staff in schools to make experiences something that children look forward to. It really has to be appreciated because it's been a rough couple of years in education, and so the effort that they're putting in to give those special experiences to kids really should be commended.
Thank you so much.
Tara, then Elizabeth. Okay, Elizabeth, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I earlier I neglected to wish Lisa and her team a happy Speech, Language, and Hearing Month, because it's especially remiss if I didn't say it. And if you do want to work to change the month, I'm with you 100%. It's also physiotherapy month, and earlier was nursing week, and there was PSW Appreciation Day, and we do kind of get overshadowed even in the medical capacity too, so we can talk if you want, figure something out.
Sarah?
I have an Adam story.
This is why I'm
Excellent.
yeah.
This is what.
This is-
I was supposed to keep that in my head, but it's why we're all here. Really, at least me, I maybe slipped it by stuff. So I just need to kudos one of our PLP teachers. So yay, extracurriculars are back, yay, we're so excited. But he called me about 4 weeks ago at the end of May, whatever month, end of April. It's going crazy. He was going to be one of the coaches on the high school baseball team and wanted to include Adam in that. So he's got a jersey, he's got pants, he's got things, he's there, he's the bat boy, he goes up and grabs the thing. The kids, I'm gonna have to say, have been so phenomenal. Like, in not just the, you get that some of the, oh, hi, hi Adam, and then, they go off and do the thing. They included him in the warm-ups, throwing the balls to him, and then figuring out that he can't catch the ball like this, but he can catch the ball like this, and I didn't have to go do that. They figured this out on their own and included him in their warm-ups, and, with the fist bumps and the thing, and he included him in that sort of thing. He's over the moon about it, he thinks it's awesome. I'm so thrilled with that, because the kids, it speaks to their character, as to who they are, so, which is great, and the coaches were being like super inclusive, and we're looking for more ways to include that, because now for me, that is unselfishly, that is now another way that we can show how kids with different abilities can be included in the extracurriculars with little to no support. And it works, and that's another pathway for other kids to do other things. So I got a picture of it, I'll see you later.
I was gonna say, can we get a photo?
Yes. They took their team photo this past week, so.
Awesome.
They're really good.
Awesome. Anybody else? Okay, I just wanted to say a couple of things. That makes me, like I listen to our young people, I listen to my kids, but a lot of other young adults and high school students, and you know what? They're good. We're gonna be okay. These kids are good. Like, there's a lot of stuff going on right now, but this generation coming up, I think they're pretty good kids, and the work that the schools and the school board have been doing with inclusivity and teaching empathy and inclusion and cooperation and all of that, it is having an impact, despite the noise that we're hearing around us right now. If we shut that out and focus on the generation coming up, I have hope, right? I really do. I feel like they're very empathetic and understanding, and I've said that many times, even when my kids were in the high school, walking through the hallways, and you would see stuff, you'd see that kind of thing, and I think we're gonna be okay in that respect. I also wanted to also say thank you, Anthony. I know firsthand how dedicated you are to inclusion and to taking a look at procedures and things within the school itself, and I appreciate your participation in SEAC. So, okay, there's nothing else. On that note, our next SEAC meeting and our last one for the 22-23 school year is on June 22nd, 2023, right here.
And the consultants are coming.
And the consultants are coming. So, yes, please make every effort for sure to make that meeting, even though like the smell of summer is there. Motion to adjourn. Kathy, second. Jen, all in favor? All right, thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah.
Thank you, Lisa.